Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Start the Week with Spencer. This is our weekly webinar here at Doman International, where we take questions from parents with children with special needs from around the world. And we urge parents to come with their biggest and most important questions. And today we have a special interview. So we have Melissa Doman, who is with us. Melissa is the Mobility Director at Doman International. And I've asked her to join us today to talk a little bit about what's the difference between a Doman Method coach and a therapist. So many families with children with special needs, when they come to us, their children are in conventional therapies, maybe speech, physical, or occupational therapy. And so today we're going to talk about what's the difference between a coach who specializes in the Doman Method at Doman International and conventional therapists. Before we jump into the interview, just a couple of quick announcements to make. So Doman International is still accepting applications for appointments this year. So we have, of course, appointments available year-round here in Philadelphia, where our headquarters are. But we have some upcoming trips, which we're very excited about. So later this month, we're going to be seeing families in Belgrade, Serbia, and in Zagreb, Croatia. In October, we are going to be seeing our European families and families from the Middle East. November, we're going to be seeing families in India, in New Delhi and Bangalore, and in Dubai. And in December, we'll be seeing families in California. I feel like I'm missing. I always miss something. Anyway, in a week, we're going to be seeing families also in Miami, Florida. All right. Well, I seem to be having technical issues on my side. Melissa and Colleen, are you having issues with loading on your side, or is it just for me?
May just be for you, hon.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So Melissa, in addition to being the mobility director, is also my wife, which you may have just figured out when she called me hon. Okay, so Melissa, let's start off a little bit talking about the difference between a Doman coach and therapists. And of course, parents, feel free to chime in with any questions that you have as you join us. So Melissa, could you maybe just start by talking about, like, what do you feel are the major differences between the Doman method and conventional therapies?
Okay, so biggest difference between Doman method and conventional therapies. I mean, and Spencer, I know you've talked about this probably in some way, shape, or form every week since you started this program. But the biggest difference is that, Doman method is designed to specifically target the root cause of a child's issues developmentally. Doesn't matter what the issues are, but the Doman method is meant to target the brain. Like if we want to see changes with a child's muscle tone or language or reading ability, whatever that is, it's the brain. It's the brain that we have to fix, where traditional therapies very often are treating symptoms and not root cause.
Can you give some specifics about maybe when conventional therapies are targeting symptoms rather than a root cause problem?
Sure, absolutely. So if we're talking about maybe speech therapy, for example, like a therapist may work on getting a kid how to move their tongue back and forth in their mouth. But if they're not even really fully aware of their mouth and how it feels and things like that, which again is a very common thing for our kids on the program, getting them to try to move their tongue around for 2 years is not going to go very far. If we can teach the brain, hey, buddy, this is where your mouth is. This is how it feels. This is how it reacts to temperature and this sensation and that sensation. You're going to have much better success at trying to get a child to eat better, talk better, etc. And from a mobility standpoint, there's still a lot of places who are, stretching and moving arms and legs around when really we need to start teaching the brain, this is how it feels to move in a cross pattern. These are your arms, these are your legs. And of course, Doman method has many, many ways of doing that. But once we are teaching the brain how to connect to those arms and legs, that's when we start to see movement. It's not a bunch of stretching and range of motion activities necessarily.
Yeah, and you've just made me think about, sometimes I'll watch videos online of therapies in practice, and the therapist will be like moving an arm or a leg, or they're kind of mimicking certain movements with the patient.
Mhm.
And I often think, oh, it's the therapist's brain which is doing the work, not the child's
Right.
brain. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think for a lot of therapies, it's all done in the spirit of getting a child independent, but and having seen this personally with my own grandfather, of course, he didn't have a brain injury, he had a hip issue, but they just helped him through everything. And I'm like, how is he supposed to learn how to do this on his own if you keep helping? And I think it's a very similar experience with a lot of like physical and physiotherapies, occupational therapies. It's all done in the spirit of trying to get a kid independent, but we're taking all the wrong routes. And very often the therapist is doing a lot more of that work than the kid should be doing.
Melissa, something that we learned from Glenn Doman, who for new parents is the founder of the Doman Method. One of the things he always used to say is that every program that we do should be self-eliminating, which was a big difference between our approach and conventional therapies. Can you talk about what does that mean when a therapy is or a treatment is self-eliminating?
It's so when we say something is self-eliminating, it means that we put the child in an environment or we do a certain program until the child doesn't need it anymore. So a very textbook example of this in Doman is the Glenn's ladder. At first, we put the Glenn's ladder very low so the child is like just barely reaching over their head. They're relying a lot on that ladder to try and stand in place and to learn how to take those steps forward. But as they start to get proficient at this level, we slowly keep putting the ladder higher until that child knows, all right, this is my center of gravity. They can barely touch the ladder rungs at that point. They're basically walking independently. And most kids at that point do learn how to walk away from the ladder. So at first, child's very heavily reliant on that ladder to balance themselves, to coordinate themselves. But by making it higher, we're eliminating the need for that ladder until eventually the child just doesn't need it at all because now they know how to walk.
Yeah, and I would encourage parents out there, certainly any Doman Method coach would be able to answer this question. But if you're working with a therapist and they're proposing some kind of treatment to you, it's always reasonable to say, how will we know when we don't need this treatment anymore? That is the answer to something being self-eliminating. And if they can't really give you a clear answer to that, if they can't say, oh, when your child, can walk independently without any help, we don't need this anymore. Or when your child starts saying his first words, we don't have to do this anymore. That's how you know when something is self-eliminating. And, one example of this is, a child is unable to feed himself. So, the therapist has a long spoon that ties to the child's wrist. And now the child with that long spoon is feeding themselves. And that's not a self-eliminating technique, right? That creates dependency on an object or a piece of equipment. So
Mhm.
it's a difference of dependency as compared to self-eliminating.
That's right. Yeah.
So Melissa, can you talk a little bit about the holistic nature of the Doman method as compared to different therapies, where parents might be going to a speech therapist, a physical therapist, occupational therapist? Talk a bit about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to kind of go through this in a slightly backwards way, I would say, as one of the directors here at Doman International, I have the privilege to wrap up families' visits. So I, answer any final questions, I get their feedback. And the one thing that I consistently hear from parents is that they had, even though they know about our work, they had no idea how comprehensive the program was going to be. They didn't realize so many people could talk about so many different topics and kind of smush it all into one big program. And I again, a lot of families who come to us will comment I have all of these different people that I need to go see. And now I can see all these people in one place, which is really, really spectacular. And, what we've learned with Doman Method over the last, 6 decades, almost 7 decades now, is that you can't just do one thing exclusively. Like, all of these things work together. There's a very, it's a, I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like kind of like a symphony of different things working all together in order to get changes. So, like, even if a family comes in to us saying, my biggest concern is my child's mobility and their muscle tone and getting them moving, like, that child is desperate for a nutrition program to start helping them relax their muscles, or to build that muscle strength, or to help them gain weight, whatever that is, in order to be stronger and healthier to move. There's respiratory programs to help, again, with that muscle tone, either bring it down or bring it up, depending on what that child needs. And we need, if we want a child to start moving more, there's got to be motivation to move. So that's very often where we start to introduce our reading programs, or our Doman cards, or our math cards, in order to, the child's interested, like, ooh, that looks like fun. And, they'll crawl, they'll creep, whatever, to those different things. So in that sense, like, Doman is kind of like one-stop shop in that sense of, like, if your child has one specific issue that you're super focused on, that's great. But there's going to be all sorts of different things that we need in order to really get lasting changes and results, where, with a PT or a physio or an OT, like, they're only going to work on one specific thing. And yes, they have goals in mind and stuff like that, but it's only scratching the surface, really, in comparison to what our kids get at Doman.
Melissa, can you talk a bit about the Doman understanding, which started with Glenn Doman, about child development, which is represented with the developmental profile, and why it's so important to understand developmental stages? And maybe specifically, if you could talk a little bit about mobility development, because sometimes I will see videos, again, online, because, different therapies pop up on my, feed on social media. And I'll see, a child in a therapy, and maybe the therapist is moving the legs of the child, kind of imitating or mimicking walking. And I don't know if you have the same thought as me. Sometimes I look at it and I go, that child's not ready for walking yet.
Yeah.
Right. And essentially, I hate to say it, I don't say it just to be negative, but that child will likely never learn how to walk just doing that. Right. Mm-hmm. Good people with good intentions. I'm not, they want to help that child, but the child isn't ready for it yet. Can you talk a bit about why does a lack of understanding of developmental stages lead to that?
Sure. Well, I think first and foremost, and, a lot of therapists out there, like, we put walking in particular, like, on a pedestal of, like, that's the ultimate goal: walking. And what very often is ignored, of course, a lot of these professionals they have an understanding of mobility development, but maybe not quite as deep as we do here at Doman. But again, because walking is put on this huge high pedestal, it's like, let's put the child in those positions, let's get them walking, like, whether with facilitation or whatever. But so often the steps of, crawling and creeping, in particular, crawling on the belly, creeping on hands and knees, are often ignored, when really they're like foundational building blocks to getting to walking. And a lot of parents will work on rolling and sitting at PT and stuff like that. But again, crawling and creeping always gets the chopping block, so to speak. And I think a lot of times that's because therapists don't think it's worth it. They don't think their patients have time to work on that. There are other things that they got to do, when really, like, that should be the bulk of the work. And all of these other things that parents come with us concerned about: my child's not rolling, they're not sitting, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. When we finally start to put in those foundational building blocks of crawling and creeping, or at least giving that opportunity, that's where we start to see significant changes when it comes to building up that ability to walk. And we have many families who have gone through all of those steps of teaching their child how to crawl on the inclined floor, then crawling on the flat floor, and going over obstacles to get on hands and knees, to do this, to do that, to ultimately walking. So those parents out there know we don't skip any steps. We might work on some steps at the same time, absolutely, but we never, ever, ever skip steps. And with regards to our profile, these steps like crawling and creeping are imperative to start developing other areas of ability. Crawling and creeping is really important for getting the two eyes to work together, to converge on things, to have visual clarity, to start reading, to start writing. And the thing I often point out to parents in the office is with mobility development, and that we have that column, but right next to it is language development. And you'll see as a child progresses in their mobility, language increases exponentially, right? So, when we have a child starting to creep on hands and knees, that's when they start to use sounds to communicate, like, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm just in a bad mood, like, come help me. But then when they start walking, that's when we start to hear words. And when they start to walk even more confidently, we hear more and more words. So, focusing on one single thing or putting, these different abilities on pedestals, like, it's a disservice to the family and more specifically to that child to not work on some of those lower level things. And, having talked to many families outside of Doman, as a former sleep coach, we would have these conversations around mobility development of like, I've been working on sitting for 6 months with my kid now. And it's like, have you ever put them on their stomach? Like, let's just make an incline floor. And then all of a sudden the pieces start to come together. So it's, again, it's an often ignored and unfortunately at this point with the American Academy of Pediatrics or whatever, there's not even much of an emphasis on crawling and creeping. But it's true, Spence. I mean, there are many kids who are put in standing positions and trying to get them to walk when they're really not ready for it. And it's because they need those pivotal steps of crawling and creeping to develop hip muscle, the muscles around the hip. They need that stability in order to stay in that position. Yes, like standing and walking might help strengthen the leg muscles, but not quite in the same way as like just put them on the floor and let them develop naturally.
Yeah, I was, to relate what you just said about mobility to speech development. I was speaking to a newer mom to Doman International last week, and she asked me, what are the different components? Like, Spencer, how do you tackle a speech problem in a child? And I said to her, well, we're going to do, with the Doman method, we're going to do certain programs to help improve breathing, because breathing is really important to be able to produce sound, right? We have to use our lung capacity and regulate our breathing to get out sounds. I said, we have to improve your child's tactile awareness of the tongue and mouth. We have to get your child feeling his or her mouth better. I said, we're going to have to do auditory stimulation to improve hearing ability, right? And so I said, we're going to start a reading program because reading is the visual input of language, right? And when we combine language visually with auditorily, now we're using two pathways instead of one to teach language.
Right.
And so, and I mentioned all those things, and then I got to speech development, right? And I think that she was very struck by, wow, okay, we're really going to lay a good foundation here. And I think that often a lot of therapists, it's almost like they're trying to build a home on a faulty foundation.
Right.
Anyone who knows anything about construction, if the foundation isn't laid down correctly, the house won't stand, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we talk about that in our courses too. And I refer back to that analogy very often. And I think what's tricky though is that it's, for professionals, it's hard to try and convince parents, like, we need to put this foundational work in. But if you don't really know the whys behind it, then it's going to be hard to explain it and work on it. Where, again, like our Doman Method coaches, like that foundational work that you and I have been referring to, like that's our bread and butter. Like we can talk about that all day, all day long. So, I think when professionals have that really deep understanding of like, no, these are the foundational things we need in order to get to those goals of starting to teach them how to walk, how to talk, etc. When there's not a deep understanding of that, it's going to leave things lacking in those traditional therapies.
Well, everyone, we now have 10 minutes for your questions. We're doing a shorter episode today. We're only doing 30 minutes because Melissa and I have to head over to the Doman International offices. We've got families in the clinic this week, so we're doing a shorter session.
Busy.
Busy
Yeah.
week, yeah. So, Melissa, the first question that we have comes from Sandra, who says, Melissa, what's your opinion about primitive reflexes approach? Is it compatible with the Doman method?
Yeah, absolutely. My short answer is yes. It actually complements Doman method pretty darn well. But what I will say is that a lot of parents who have pursued this are given programs where they're working on like 10 to 15 different reflexes at the same time. And it ends up being, if a Doman method coach is saying your reflex integration program is too much, like it's too much, because we give pretty hefty programs. So like I said, short answer is absolutely. It complements Doman method really well, but you have to be strategic about which reflexes to work on. And it really does depend on where your child is mobility wise and things like that. But in my years of like my own research with primitive reflexes and what other families have done, I find that the big ones to work on are Moro, ATNR, and STNR reflexes. Anything outside of that, like I feel is you're not going to get. It's all a matter of the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to time, right? So if you have things that specifically target those three reflexes, kind of irregardless of a child's mobility level or where they're at, like you're going to be in pretty good shape. Now there are other ones, like I said, that can be helpful, but those are the biggies. And again, you just have to be careful that you're not trying to work on 30 different reflexes at the same time. It's a lot.
Melissa, of the three reflexes you just mentioned, Moro, ATNR, you said STNR?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How many do we teach?
We teach, well, we technically teach all three of them. Okay. And we don't necessarily say like, this is a Moro reflex integration program. It's like, no, this is balance and it's going to help with that Moro, but it's going to help with arm and leg movement. It's going to help with your child's awareness of where they are in space. It's going to make it more fun to be on the floor. So, I mean, we, in many of our different programs, whether it's mobility or patterning or whatever, like there are ways for us that we address it, but we don't necessarily need to like say this is a primitive reflex integration because we know again like it's all foundational work. So
and
yeah.
there are some primitive reflexes that in our experience are not worthwhile stimulating. Melissa mentioned the ones that are, and then we also do with certain children things like light reflex stimulation when necessary, startle reflex. But when we look at, for example, Babinski reflex, there are many primitive reflex therapies that stimulate the Babinski. We tried that for many years and found no results, so we stopped it. Yeah. So, and in fact, children who retain a Babinski reflex, which is a baby reflex, they usually retain it because they need it, because they can't make specific physical movements correctly without it. And the good news for those children is when they have a mobility advancement and they start walking and running, they no longer need the Babinski and they outgrow it. But you could take that child and stimulate the Babinski 1,000 times and it wouldn't make a difference. Yeah. So some of the time, I don't believe they have the research to back up that all of the primitive reflexes are worth the time invested.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we've got a question here from Motika who says, please, I'm putting my daughter on the floor, but it's very difficult for her to crawl. She instead moves backwards. What can I do to get her to actually crawl? That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. So Motika, not knowing too much about your daughter and where she's at mobility wise, how old she is, my initial thought is like she needs an incline floor, because what she's doing right now is she's teaching her brain, when I move in my arms and legs, I move backwards, which we want her to go forward. So by utilizing the incline floor and putting her on that incline, gravity is pushing her in the right direction. So all of those arm and leg movements that she's doing are going to help her to push forward if on that incline floor surface. And eventually that's going to translate into forward motion on the flat floor. And then again, we're now eliminating the need for that incline floor. So I encourage you, Motika, if you haven't already, start looking into getting or building an incline floor for your daughter. It's going to make things a lot more, it's going to make things easier for her. It's going to feel more successful. It's going to feel more fun, because now it's like, oh, this is what's supposed to happen. And it's a lot easier for me to do it. And then in the meantime, until you get the incline floor, it's a very technique-y thing. And as soon as you get the incline floor, stop it. But in the meantime, just like put your hands here by her feet. So if she's kicking her arms and legs, at least she's trying to get forward rather than going backward. If anything, we use it as a way to prevent her from moving backwards until you've got that incline floor. Once you have the incline floor, plunk her on it, let her go, and have a good time with it.
We have a quick question. I can answer this one on Instagram from Amira, who says, "Is this meeting recorded on the page?" Yes. Yeah, all of these episodes are recorded and are placed on our Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram pages afterwards. Melissa, just for going back to Motika's question about the incline floor, where can she learn about the incline floor?
So she can learn about so Motika, you can learn about the incline floor in a number of our books. Our number one book for mobility development is Immobility to Mobility, right? Immobility to Walking. Yeah. Oh gosh, now I don't remember.
From Immobility to Walking, yeah.
Immobility to Walking, sorry. But that's where you're going to learn about the incline floor. There are diagrams on how to build an incline floor there. If you have a younger baby, like a baby, so under 12 months old, we have something called the incline crawling track, which is slightly padded for babies. And you can learn about that in the book, How Smart Is Your Baby?
Colleen, have you ever been in touch with Motika?
Yes. And I'm actually going to send you links for those as well. So that I actually just started an email to you. So you'll have it within about 15 minutes. For sure.
All right. Well, we've got thank yous, Melissa. We've got a wonderful message here from Virginia just saying, God bless you. Thank you, Virginia. We really appreciate that. Let's see. Well, Melissa, we're actually coming up on the end of time here. Melissa, how would you recommend, for someone who's rather new to the Doman method to learn more?
That's a great question. I would say just reach out to Colleen. She'll tell you everything you need to know.
Kind of my job.
That's like, not to sugarcoat it or anything, but like basically Colleen will tell you all you need to know. But we have a lot of great information on our website. There are plenty of books out there on our Amazon page as well. And on Instagram, we're constantly posting videos of our kids on the program, making the changes that they're making. So if you're not quite ready to talk to Colleen yet, which is fine, it's fine. You've got plenty of books and places to go. But if you have not done so already, just get on a call with Colleen. Just feel her out, ask her questions. She can handle it.
Colleen, can you give your contact info?
Absolutely. My email address is info, INFO, @domaninternational.org. And my WhatsApp number is country code 1-814-232-8668. And if you message us through social media, I see all of those messages as well. But direct is, ideal. So please message me. I was going to say that since the question is what's the difference between a Doman coach and the therapist, I feel that one of the biggest differences, certainly from what I've heard from parents, is that the therapist, they know what they're doing in terms of their area. They mean well. I mean, all of them want to see kids improve, of course. But I think that for Doman Method coaches, a key component is empowering parents as
Yeah,
well, to know
absolutely.
that you've got this. You've got this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, your intuition
Absolutely.
is.
Yeah, and what I've heard from other families on our Doman program who have done like intensives and other treatments, they're like, the amount of support we get afterwards is unlike anything else. Like, families will do these crazy long 2-3 week intensives and then not hear from anybody ever on the other side when they go home. And it's, again, like, it's set up, those are set up in a way of like, okay, we're going to do this work here. Then you just go home and you wait for a little while, and then you come back and you do more work, where it's like, for our Doman Method coaches, like, we're going to tell you what you got to do, but you're going to do it at home, and we're going to coach you through it the entire time. And the great thing about that is, like, as your child makes changes at home, we're there to support you and make further modifications to that program. So that way we're just not skipping a beat at any point. So because I was thinking, Colleen, I was like, did we really actually answer this question?
Yeah.
But I think that's really the biggest difference. It's the amount of support and empowerment that you get from the coaches here. I mean, not only do we all have a very deep understanding of not just our areas of specialty, but all of the Doman Method programs. You have that support afterwards as well. And for as long as you are on our program, that support is there.
Yeah, I've known mothers who said, after I did this program, I knew I could do anything.
Yeah.
Which is.
Well, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us. We'll end off on that note. Melissa and I are going to head over to our clinic now. And everyone have a great rest of your week.
Thank
See
you,
you next
everyone.
week. Bye, everyone.